Welcome back to another Badlands Mini-Set card review. This is Delve Into Deepholm, and we've got Druid, Priest, Warlock, and Mage cards today. Kicking things off here with a card I think could be absolutely busted. This is Shattered Reflections, a dual class for Priest and Druid. It's a 5-mana spell. It allows you to choose a minion that can be either friendly or enemy. Notably, you can use this on your enemies' cards as well. And it will add a copy to your hand, your deck, and your battlefield, which is a familiar text line. You may remember Sathravar, the old 9-cost demon. He did the same thing, but he could only be used on friendly cards, and he cost 1 billion. I think he was 9 cost. I gotta look this up now that I say that. Yeah, here he is, Sathravar the demon. Crazy. So you're paying 4 extra for that 5/5 body, but it made him so hard to play at 9 mana, at least naturally, because you know you want to play something down with him. Shattered Reflections, much easier to play something down with it. On top of that, you don't even have to play anything down because you can just take cards of your opponent. Your opponent plays a Titan you want to get access to. Okay, cool. I'll get their Titan on board, maybe use that Titan to remove, their Titan so that that problem's dealt with. Also get an extra one in hand and in deck. Just an obscene value generator. They can also develop the board as well, which is nice. If you look at like Druid in particular, you've got ANR. This is nuts. You can get multiple ANRs out of these Shattered Reflections super easily. You can actually get, I guess, all 3. You get 3 ANRs because ANR is going to give you 10 mana back. Play a Shattered Reflections on an ANR, play a Shattered Reflections number 2 on an ANR, and your board is just all 5/5s and ANRs, and you've drawn all your cards, and you've healed yourself to full, and you are absolutely insane because this card gave you also 4 more ANRs if you do that, because you get 2 more in hand and then 2 more in deck. So it's just like crazy obscene value, potentially crazy board swings. And the flexibility of it just makes it absolutely nuts. Priest is going to love a card like this, especially because they love all that greedy value. The potential there's nuts. And I actually think Druid has that too with stuff like ANR. So all in all, Shattered Reflections to me just looks completely nuts. This card is super strong. So now let's move on over to the Glowstone Gyreworm, a new 4-mana 4/4 elemental for Priest. It's got Lifesteal and Quick Draw, deal 5 damage. So when that Quick Draw lines up, really nice onboard swing, can go face as well, give you a little bit of health. So health swing and potential board swing as well, able to clear minions. That is a nice little package. As we know, Quick Draw has not really been the biggest hit. I mean, there are some decent Quick Draw cards, but it feels like that's mostly been in Rogue where they have bounce effects to really utilize that Quick Draw well, and a lot of the other ones have just kind of fallen flat. So in other words, this effect I think is pretty difficult to rely on. Now that said, the Gyreworm here has a secondary aspect. You can forge it to change that Quick Draw into a battle cry. So anytime you have that 2 spare mana, you just forge this up real quick and you no longer have to worry about the Quick Draw aspect. Which does create this really nice tool. And you're just looking for stuff to do in the early game. Turn 2, you forge this because you got nothing else going on, and then turn 4, you've got yourself a really nice card. Maybe even you have the coin, you play this on turn 3 as a follow-up to that turn 2 forge. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. This card does do a lot. Now, more notably than that perhaps is that if you're running Reno style decks, you just need stuff, you need bodies, you need cards. Stuff like this does start to make more and more sense, particularly because this gives you access to an extra forge in your list, which means you can still more reliably hit that Ignis, who requires you to forge before his effect is active. And we know Ignis is one of the best cards in Hearthstone right now. So having extra forge plays that are good for a Reno Priest deck, especially who needs extra forge plays because they only run one of the other forge cards, that starts to look a lot better for me. So I think there is an angle for this card in Reno deck specifically, maybe a little bit less needed elsewhere, but still does quite a bit for just a 4-cost minion. So next card here is another dual class for Priest and Druid. It's a nature spell, 3 mana. Discover a minion from your deck and gain armor equal to its cost. So giving Priest some armor gain actually feels relevant. Sometimes Priest wants to get higher than their base health total, and that's hard to do, and this is a great way to do that for a class that cares a lot about survivability. And then on Druid side of thing, we actually still have armor synergy cards floating around in standard format. Stuff like, I think it's the Crypt Keeper, is that card's name? That gets cheaper with your armor. Yeah, so this is actually kind of perfect. If you discover a Crypt Keeper on turn 3, he costs 8, he gives you 8 armor. You can play him for 0, so you get a 3 mana 4/6 that, you know, thinned out your deck a little bit and gave you a ton of bonus armor right at the start of the game. So kind of a perfect target for any sort of armory synergy druid. Alternatively, you can just grab, you know, big stuff you're going to want to make sure you find your Titan or Colossus or whatever, and Pendant of Earth is going to make sure you hit that and get some extra survivability along the way, making this feel a bit like a shield block almost in many cases, an OG shield block, where you're getting a card from your deck and you're gaining armor as well, which is, you know, that's good. We liked shield block for a long time. I think I still like it now, even though it's a little bit cheaper. This has a lot of that same vibe, and the discover aspect in particular just makes it much more efficient at getting what you want out of it, which can be pretty nice. Moving on to a druid card specifically here. This is the Crystal Cluster, a 6 mana spell. It gains you 3 empty mana crystals, and then any that can't fit, summon a 3/7 elemental with taunt. So if you play this on turn 6, it's just basically some Giga ramp, kind of passing your turn 6 altogether, but you're going to be ready to go for the end of the game, starting on turn 7 right away. If you do happen to get this later, it's not a totally dead card, because if you're already at like 10 mana or whatever, and you play the Crystal Cluster, you're going to get 3/3/7 taunt bodies, which has that kind of Spreading Plague or Dragon Golem vibe. It's not quite as wide as something like Dragon Golem, but still would present a nice defensive wall. I think there are some weird kind of gap turns in the middle there where, you know, if you're on like 8 mana, 9 mana, this is a really awkward card to play perhaps, because you're not getting enough 3/7 bodies for that 6 cost to feel worth it, and the ramp is probably not all that meaningful either, because it's not closing all that much distance. And even a lot of the time on turn 6, this might just be too all in on the ramp, right? Something like Nourish often feels like a little bit more of a middle ground, like you get to ramp for less, but you get that immediate mana back, which can still keep things pushing. And then, you know, it also has a fallback plan of card draw, which I think is probably more useful for Druid in many cases than the fallback plan here of the 3/7 taunts, because, you know, card draw can just turn into lots of different things in Druid. So to me, I don't know, this, you know, if this were like 4 mana and had 2 empty mana crystals and it had that kind of overgrowth space, I'd be a little bit more excited about it. But I think the cost up front just gets too high here to make this card really, really exciting to me, particularly with the Dragon Golems of the world out there. Crystal Cluster's taunt bodies don't seem nearly as necessary to me. It just seems like a little bit less efficient ramp and a lot less efficient board summoning, which will keep this card, I think, held down quite a bit. Moving on to the Gloomstone Guardian, our Druid and Warlock card. This is a 4 mana 6/8 elemental. He is a big boy. He's got taunt, and choose one, discard 2 cards, or destroy one of your mana crystals. And if you forge him up front, you don't have to do either. So number one, just really big disruptive body early in the game. Coming down on turn 4, that 6/8 stat line is going to be impactful. That's still going to matter because it has taunt. It's going to force your opponent to interact through it quite a bit. The discard aspect here can actually be a pretty notable upside for Warlock. Discarding cards can be a good thing. Could we see another all-in discard Warlock deck? We've kind of got Sludge Warlock floating around right now, which definitely feels like a discard adjacent Warlock. So maybe that's already enough. You're just happy to discard your sludges, perhaps, and so on. Right now that has Trolley Problem that's discarding, that's targeted, which helps, and then Tome Tampering, but that's of course a little bit more specific to your sludges. So does this have like space in that deck? Do they need that? Is it going to miss on its discards too often? Those are some challenging questions that I think if you added more of the discard payoff cards, and maybe still some sludges as well as discard payoff cards, you might be able to build a more like discard centric deck. I know, like in duels and wild format, another great discard tool potentially that could push discard Warlock in both of those cases. Now, destroying one of your mana crystals is often not going to feel worth it if you're doing this straight up on turn 4. That might just make you fall behind. That reverse ramp is not something you want to do. If you're late in the game, though, on turn 10 or whatever, that's totally fine. You can destroy one of your mana crystals just to get this down as a big 4 cost 6/8, and you're pretty happy. Now, how often are you going to be forging this? Sometimes you might just have that 2 spare mana and be okay with it, but Warlock in particular really likes to hero power, and a lot of like discard center decks would have a ton of plays on turn 2, so I don't think you're going to be forging this or wanting to lose the discard. Druid, I think, is going to have a harder time with this card overall. Like, do they want to forge on 2 just to get this down on turn 4? I don't think so, but ultimately there is still a pretty cool angle for this with discard in particular, which I think the body is big enough to warrant some experimentation there. Moving on to the Trog Gem Tosser. This artwork makes you laugh. He's just like throwing these tiny gems at you. He's a 3 mana 3/2 with Finale. Deal 1 damage to a random enemy for each of your mana crystals. So this can actually be kind of scary. If you look at this as a 3 mana deal 10, like that's kind of spooky, right? So late in the game, these do become a threat. Now, with this big Finale, theoretically, you're only getting 1 of these in a given turn because you can't Finale 2 cards that cost 3. The first one, you're going to have 3 mana left. The second one will be the Finale one. But I think there are ways around that with stuff like Thaddeus. With Thaddeus discounting these, you could actually play them both while at 0 mana, and both Finales could activate. So there might be some kind of like Thaddeus combo deck that's possible here, particularly in Warlock. In Druid, this might still be kind of intriguing, just as a way for Druid to get some extra reach, a little bit of a board clear technically as well, depending on how many minions are on board. But I'm more concerned about this in Warlock, where they're able to wipe a board and then just send 20 to face off the Trog Gem Tossers. There's also some interesting stuff in Wild format with Guff in Druid, where you go to 20 mana and he's just did 20. It's like a free extra Astalor basically, which is kind of funny. So I don't know, like, are these good earlier in the game? Do these feel good on turn 3? I mean, sometimes you might feel okay with it on turn 3. Like, I really need to kill that 2 health thing. I'm going to trust my arcane missiles here attached to a body, and it feels like a nice little swing. Is it good on turn 7, turn 8? Maybe, yeah. The Finale is a condition that will occasionally be hard to actually activate because you just don't have clean mana breaks. But I think there will be moments where cleaning up a couple small things, getting some chip damage, does feel interesting. And then there's also still that combo potential to keep in mind for this card too. Moving on here to the Elementium Geode, a 2 mana 2/1 elemental. This one's specific to Warlock. It's got Battle Cry and Death Rattle, draw a card, and deal 2 damage to your hero. So you're going to take 4 damage here for playing the Elementium Geode, but you are going to draw 2 cards and get a little 2/1 body. So is this like a worthwhile replacement basically for your hero power? Because it's basically like getting a couple hero powers in one. I think maybe, yeah, you get that immediate draw, which is nice. You don't have to like wait on this. That's really important, I think, for card draw in Hearthstone these days. Making sure you have time to react and do something right away, as opposed to waiting into the future, because you need cards now. I need to find removal now. I need to find a threat now, etc. This still gives you that. So it's kind of like hitting your hero power button. But is the risk, is the downside here too high? Or are we going to see a return of like self-damage Warlock decks where this is actually going to become an upside, where damaging yourself is really valuable? That's certainly been an angle that the class has taken before. So that could be a downside that turns into an eventual upside. But ultimately, this kind of like loot hoarder plus this superhero power for Warlock, it's interesting. I think packing extra hero powers in the early game could be important for some decks that really need to find specific cards, whether those are combo decks or just things that are looking for, the right pieces of the puzzle for the deck gameplay. And this definitely advances towards that. Moving on to Warlock and Mage, we have a couple cards to close here. This is Chaos Creation, a 6 mana Fel spell. Of course, spell schools can be relevant for Rainbow Mage stuff. This one's going to deal 6 damage, which is actually quite a bit of damage output already. It's going to summon a random 6-cost minion, and it's going to destroy the bottom 6 cards of your deck. So this is looking like Firelands Portal Plus. Let's go. This is exciting. Until you get to that last line and you're like, oh, wait a minute. I don't know how good this can be in Mage. Particularly if you look at like Rainbow Mage, that's kind of risky. If you don't already have Sif in hand in particular, I don't know if you can tank the destroy the bottom 6. But obviously in Warlock, we know with Sludge Warlock in particular, this can be a big upside. Putting all the sludges on the bottom, this can be actually a really big damage hit sort of card, because you can send 6 to face. You can send multiple sludges to face. You can draw more cards off your like Furnace Fuel. This actually looks to be like a really good finisher for a Warlock deck. Could this replace something like Steam Cleaner in that list? You know, I don't know. It's a definite possibility because I like how much reach this has. Plus, you're still developing a threat on board too with this random 6-drop. So I haven't played enough Sludge Warlock to tell you how this feels from like a curve standpoint or how necessary this feels. With something like, you know, Tome Tampering is a sort of finisher, but to me it feels like it really does meet a lot of those needs, and it's just more damage and more pressure and you know, really effective at what it's doing. So I think this card looks really good in Warlock. I think a lot riskier in Mage. I don't know if they'll be able to tolerate that downside. And then finally here we have Soul Freeze, a 1-mana frost spell for Warlock and Mage. This one's gonna freeze a minion and its neighbors, so kind of a cone of cold here. You're not dealing the damage, but you're getting to lock down the board, and you're gonna deal damage to your hero equal to the number frozen. So you're getting really cheap cone of cold, but you're potentially gonna take 3 damage for that. Now that's often going to result in such a lockdown that you're quite happy to have tanked that 3 damage, because, you know, you might be, you know, stalling out 3 5/5s on board and you were going to take a bunch of hits, and this is so cheap that it allows you to really continue any given game plan, continue drawing cards, develop your own counter threats. Whatever you need to do is going to be possible because this is so cheap to weave into a turn while stalling out your opponent. So I think this card actually looks really good. Just super efficient ways to slow them down, buy yourself some time. The 3 health is a risk, but it's one you can probably tolerate. There's life gain, etc. So to me, I think this just looks like such an efficient stall that the decks will find a use for this one. Looks pretty dang good. So that said, let's go ahead and do some quick reviews. Shattered Reflections is a 5-star card. Glowstone Gyreworm is a 3-star card. Pendant of Earth is a 4-star card. Crystal Cluster is a 2-star card. Gloomstone Guardian is a 3-star card. Trog Gym Tosser is a 3-star card. Elementium Geode is a 4-star card. Chaos Creation is a 4-star card. And Soul Freeze is a 4-star card. And there you go. That wraps it up for this review. I like today's cards a lot better than yesterday's. I thought yesterday's, a lot of those felt pretty weak to me, to be honest. But some highlights, some standouts here. So some cards I think will absolutely get some use, which is nice to see. Maybe not as much like fun stuff today, although Shattered Reflections is kind of fun. There's some crazy things you can do with this card, I bet. But nonetheless, much higher power level in my estimation. So excited to see what lies in store for the final 2 days of reviews. We got a little bit of a gap. I think we come back on Monday and Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. Share your thoughts on these cards down in the comments below. Thank you much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.